Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new meeting of the Finance Network series titled InConversation, Exploring the Philosophy of Money and Finance. And today we are delighted to welcome Frank Hindriks from University of Groningen, who will be interviewed by Johannes Smith from the University of Stellenbosch. Of course, thank you, Frank and Andrew, for accepting our invitation. And today's interview is titled The Social Ontology of Money, and it is inspired by a chapter authored by Frank in the recently published volume, The Philosophy of Money and Finance, edited by Joachim Sandberg and Lisa Warensky, and published by Oxford University Press. As usual, following the interview, we will open the floor for discussion. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand using the Zoom menu, and I'll moderate the queue. So that's all for me for now, and let's begin the interview. Enjoy it.
Okay, thank you very much, Emiliano, and thank you, Lisa, for the chance to interview Frank. Frank, I have quite a few questions that I would like to ask, especially in part because the chapter you wrote deals partially with my work. But starting from the beginning, it's always good to get a sense of a philosopher by asking them what motivates your interest in this topic of money and specifically, but then also in social ontology more broadly.
Yeah, thank you, Hannes. So I started studying, this is a long time ago, economics. And then I moved to philosophy, and I noticed that in economics, money just is in equilibrium, basically. Like institutions more generally are treated as equilibria in a game. Now, that had been explained to me. I had studied that, and then in philosophy, I came across very different theories that explain institutions in terms of rules. And that view seemed to be more intuitive, like a rule is something you can follow, you can do what the rule says. And so if the rule says stop in front of a red traffic light, then that's what you do. But I had a continuing sense that the equilibrium approach is also very illuminating in a sense, because it captures the incentives that people have when they act within the context of an institution. So again, with a traffic light, for instance, you have certain incentives. If it's your own safety, if it's the fine you might get, perhaps also just your convictions about how you ought to behave. But then we have the connection with rules again. So I was just very much puzzled by these two very different perspectives on what institutions are. And I was wondering how they could be combined, and that has been one of the main things I've been trying to do over the past couple of decades.
Okay, thank you very much for that. You've partially anticipated the answer to the next question. But what I wanted to ask then is, do tell us a little bit about your view on social ontology. Where did you end up given this starting point?
Thanks. Yeah, that is the nice thing about working on it on a field like social ontology for a couple of decades. At some point, you start to develop an idea of what you are doing. So philosophers, like any discipline, have their own methodology. Usually we say we do conceptual analysis, but it's much more what we actually are doing. And for me, it was important to have a connection between philosophy, philosophical theories, and the social sciences. And so it doesn't only apply to money, or traffic lights, but also to marriage and property and segregation. So there are many insights from the social sciences that can be used to shed light on also the ontology of institutions. Now, what you often see is that philosophers kind of divide things in two. Like there's the interesting stuff, and that's what they do, and that's the uninteresting stuff. That's what the social scientists do. This is basically what John Searle was saying. He claimed that no social scientist had ever said anything useful about institutions, which is a big insult, or just an expression of his ignorance, or both. So my approach, my methodological approach, is very different from that. but also from like analytic metaphysicians who claim that you can do metaphysics in your head. It's a bit quick of a summary of their view, of course. But for me, the idea that you have to take into account good, solid, fundamental philosophical thinking and scientific theorizing, which ultimately is based on empirical research, but also, and that is for me a third source of inspiration, and that is common sense. Now, lots of scientists don't care about common sense for good reasons. It's not their business. But within philosophy, I do think that at least some of us should work on figuring out how our common sense conception of the world relates to how much remains once you start reflecting on it philosophically and scientifically. And I try to rescue a fair bit of folk social ontology, as you might want to, as you could say, including when it comes to money. You're muted, I'm afraid.
Sorry, everybody. I want to ask a little bit more detail. So your view on social ontology, like what exactly is the theory? So a little bit of background to the readers. So always Frank, and when he's working with Francisco Guala, always refer to us as the team because we're up against a sort of Searlean dogma. Searle's views very much rule sort of the discussion. And our views are very, very close to one another, that we arrived at independently, and we're sort of the anti-Searle team. But we do have significant differences between us. So we're still due to have a civil war at some point, and no doubt it will be quite bloody, as civil wars tend to be. But so what exactly is your view? What is an institution?
Oh, an institution, as I see it, is kept by a rule, a social rule that governs a social practice. So it's basically two components, and the rule comes first, the rule that specifies how you're supposed to behave within a marriage or within traffic. And that has to be a social rule in the sense that it depends on what people believe and expect and prefer. So that's where the incentive part also comes in. And then that rule governs our behavior, our social practice. So there's a social practice of people who either stop in front of traffic lights or don't, depending on where you are, or on what vehicle you use. I mean, I live in the Netherlands, and bikers are not very serious about the traffic lights. But also, yeah, in a marriage, like if you have a monogamous relationship, do you actually follow that rule, or do you violate it? Do you cheat? And this, for me, is also very important for bringing together the rule component and the incentives underlying it, and kept by the equilibrium. Because in some cases, the institution, the rule, comes apart from the social practice. And like if in some context a lot of people cheat, even if this is not known to everybody, then the social practice diverges from the rule. And my view can accommodate these discrepancies because it has these two components.
Okay, thank you for that. I must say it does have intuitive force, which is unfortunate since our team, we're still deeply skeptical of the notion of a rule. We'd like to do absolutely everything with incentives. But moving on a bit there to money. So what exactly is it about the nature of money that makes it so difficult or interesting or problematic? And I must say, I've experienced this. If you write anything with the word money in the title or the abstract, it just gets a lot more hits from like members of the public. Like people can't get enough of it. So what is it about money that makes it so interesting for social ontology?
Yeah, it's a very often used example. And we use money on almost a daily basis. So, and it's quite important in our lives. So it's very visible in that sense. And it seems rather intuitive and unproblematic and easy to understand. But once you start looking into it, it turns out to be incredibly complex. So that is a fascinating observation you have to confront. And this was already, it's not philosophers who discovered that, it's also in economics, and it's the commodity theory and the credit theory. Which theories of a phenomenon can be more different than those two? So that I find absolutely fascinating, this conflict between, on the one hand, we deal with it every day. It seems that we know what we're dealing with, but at a deeper level, there's little agreement and many puzzles.
Okay, so this brings us now to your view of the ontology of money as such. So it's probably best to set it up with reference to the problem with the Searlean view, if we were to sort of start there and then work our way towards your own solution.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. Let's bring in Searle a little bit later. So let's start with the commodity and the credit theories.
That's fine.
The commodity theory says that money is a commodity. There's a lot more to be said, of course, but that is very intuitive in the sense that it fits our idea that money is a thing. You can touch it and you can give it to someone else. You can have it in your pocket. So money then is seen as something that facilitates exchange, and the credit theory starts from a very different point of view. It has on a prominent version. It says, well, money was invented by the state in order to allow people to postpone paying their taxes. So they might stop by you as a farmer and say, well, we need 3 of your sheep because that's what you owe us. But instead of that, you could give them a piece of paper. Now, the first view really is related to the idea that money is an object, whereas the second is you could still say, well, it's a document, it's a piece of paper, and you sign it and everything, so that's an object, but that seems much less important to it. So, and I think that also goes to the heart of some of the disagreements that you and I have.
Okay, so, and your view?
Yeah, so the credit theory could be used as a step up to say, well, money is an abstract object. It's still an object, but it's abstract instead of concrete. And it's all about the what is represented. And then there is a third view that says that money is a property. And by that I mean money is a property of an agent. So if I have some money, that means that I have some purchasing power. And for that, I don't need an object, as long as this is recognized. And maybe we need to make a note of it as some kind of representation on a computer or wherever. So then it is a power that I have. And this idea that money is purchasing power also connects to what it can do in practice. Of course, usually we talk about exchange, but Jerry Cohen, the political philosopher, he argued that money can break down barriers, often in a literal sense, that if you want to enter a subway, there's a barrier. If you have a ticket for which you've paid, that barrier will disappear. So this property view also connects very much to how, certain ideas about what you can do with money. But now we have 3 views: money as a concrete object, money as an abstract object, and money as a property. And we're still not at my view, because things are even more complicated. I don't want to add a 4th distinct view. I want to say, well, perhaps we should defend a hybrid view. That allows for money to have a different ontological status in different contexts. So when money is an object, it is when it's, for instance, a piece of paper, then it is a concrete object. But when it's only a representation on a computer, for instance, then my view says that representation represents a property that I have. So just as I am a bit more than 6 feet tall, I also have a certain amount of purchasing power. So that's a hybrid view because it says that in some cases money is an object, and in other cases it's a property.
Okay, so and your reason for preferring your view to sort of the other extant views? In the paper, you discuss a fair amount of criticism of the other views, including our view. And so I'd
Yeah,
like to know your reason for dismissing the other views.
yeah. But so you argue that money is an abstract object, and on the one hand, that seems perfectly fine in the sense that money always involves representations, and so maybe they represent abstract objects that it's. I can see how you would get there, and you have some good arguments, of course. However, I reserve the option of going abstract for the last. By that I mean, say, and on the classical conception of abstract objects, they are timeless, they don't exist in space, and they don't have causal powers. So if you say that something is an abstract object, you imply that it doesn't have any of these kind of properties. But money is datable, so to say. Certain currencies are introduced at a certain point of time, and they might also stop existing. They are also limited in terms of space. They have geographical boundaries, at least where they are used or where they are the primary currency. And they have causal powers because they have causal consequences. So to capture or to avoid the implications that would not be the case, I would start with a different view, which I also think is pretty intuitive. Like money as a means of exchange, that suggests that it's like an object. Money as purchasing power, that sounds more like it's a property. So again, I stay pretty close to folk ideas about social ontology.
Okay. I want to press a little bit on that. This is obviously not the context to have a big dispute about this. This is something I hope to write a paper out reasonably soonish, and then we'll discuss in the literature. But I do want to ask something. So one thing that motivated our view very much is the thought that, well, when you own a dollar, what do you own? More interestingly, when you own $2, what is the thing such that you have two of it? So it's very easy to say if I've two apples, there's this thing, an apple, and I have two of it. Whereas when it comes to the dollar, it isn't the case that there's this thing such that I have two of it. It's just not so. And then this raises the question, well, but then why in the monetary system is 1 + 1 = 2? Because very easy with apples. There's one apple and now I have two apples. That's why 1 + 1, that works. But what makes it so that these numbers act as the ordinary properties of cardinal numbers, although as we argue in the paper, ultimately they should be interpreted as ratios. And so we thought we can come up with a answer to, if you own $7, seven of what do you own? And I'm not fully convinced. As I understand it, you're saying the abstract property, the property in question is power. So what is the meaning of the seven there if I own $7? I mean, it's not like I owe seven purchasing powers. I mean, the purchasing power varies wildly from moment to moment.
Yeah. First of all, if you own seven $1
Hello?
bills, you have seven objects, right? So you're really focusing
In
on
that case, which is rare.
Yeah. So you're focusing on electronic money here.
Well, yeah, I mean, even if I have a $10 bill, there's nothing that I own 10 of. I just have a bill that says 10 on it.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's similar. Like when I'm 6 feet tall, I mean, I don't even know why I'm 6 feet because I'm Dutch. I use the metric system, so
Yes.
I'm 1 meter 88. So there's no thing that I own 1.88 of. So I think this counts against the view that money is an object and in favor of the view that money is a property.
No, I would push back on that. I mean, if you're 1.88 meters, there is this thing, the length. The length is a fixed amount. and that's done. It's very easy to show why 1 meter plus another meter equals 2 meters. I mean, I can point to a meter. That's, a certain fixed length.
Yeah.
Now, you don't own that, but you are that. But I can explain why 1 plus 1 equals 2. Whereas my question in the money case, I mean, purchasing power is a thing that money has purchasing power in our view, but we're not going to say it is purchasing power.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so if it is an object, I think it has purchasing power, but if it's a property of a person or a company for that matter, then I would say it is purchasing power.
Okay. Yeah,
And then indeed, I mean, the scale of that, I mean, as we know, it's hugely relative to things, goods and services, and to other currencies and all that. But I'm not sure whether that is a big problem.
Okay. Then yes, that's a discussion we will have in a different venue. Then pretty much at how much time Emiliano said we have. So I wanted to close with a question. So tell us a bit about your current and future work on money and social ontology. What direction are things currently going in?
Yeah, so this idea that money is power has intrigued me. Actually, Jerry Cohen also says money is freedom, but then again, some conceptions of freedom and power are closely aligned. But I want to look more generally into how institutions influence freedom and power, and then also relate that to the literature on structural injustices. And literature on structural injustice is now very much, recently Maeve McKeown introduced a notion of power in this context. I want to build on that. And that probably will also bring me to think about how inequalities in power, what kind of consequences they have for justice and all that, and whether that inheres in individuals or in structures or in both. And so there's lots of fun puzzles to look forward to.
One question about that: when you talk about institutions, do you mean formal or formal and informal institutions?
Oh, the notion of institution I use very broadly, both formal and informal. For me, institutions involve social practices, which is a pretty simple phenomenon, people interacting with each other in typical ways. And what you need on top of that is some kind of social norm. And lots of so conventions, maybe taboos or customs and traditions can also involve that. So in that sense, I use the notion in a very broad manner.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank. And then I hand back to Emiliano.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank and Johannes, for this stimulating interview. And we now open the Q&A. To ask a question, please raise your virtual hand by clicking the button on the bottom of the Zoom menu, and then we manage the queue. I don't know if there are questions. Yeah, I see a question coming from Brett Sherman. So thank you, Brett.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much for doing this. Really interesting. I wanted to ask a question about your aversion to treating money as an abstract object on the grounds that they don't have causal powers. And so I wanted to consider an analogy involving novels. So suppose that I read James Joyce's Ulysses and I study it in depth, memorize bits of it, so on and so forth. And I end up getting inspired by the novel to, say, write my own work. It seems to me that what I'm inspired by is the novel Ulysses, which is an abstract object, rather than any particular concrete copy of it. Moreover, as a kind of abstract object, novels like Ulysses are different from other kinds of abstract objects, maybe like numbers, in that there's a sense in which they come into existence at a certain time. They're arguably not in space, But it does seem like there was a time before the novel Ulysses existed. At least we talk that way. And money, it seems to me, seems to be similar to that kind of an abstract object, in that we can talk about a time before US dollars existed. We can locate particular kinds of money in different regions of time and in different locations to some extent. So I guess my question is, if we recognize different classes of abstract objects, and we see money as looking, if insofar as it's abstract, and I don't have a view about whether it is, but insofar as it is an abstract object, it would be more like a novel than it would be like a number. How bad is it to say that sort of an abstract object can have some causal powers, given that it seems to me like we want to ascribe certain causal powers to some of those abstract objects, in the way that like a novel can inspire you or a piece of music can inspire you when you reflect on it?
Yeah, thanks so much. That's a wonderful question. And I think that is indeed the best analogy to make, if you or at least one of the best. Anders might have another one in store, but I've thought about this, like symphonies and novels. There seem to be good reasons to regard them as abstract, yet they are temporal and spatial in some respects. So Barry Smith coined the term quasi-abstract for phenomena like that. And I'm perfectly happy to consider that notion for artworks. But what you were saying at the end, and there are these problems, for instance, with explicating the causal role. Of course, someone who defends such a view will indeed say, well, a symphony can make someone cry, right? So it has causal consequences, but not abstract object, it seems. So you need to tell a more elaborate story there. And there the story usually is, well, it's an instantiation of an abstract object, right? Or an exemplification. And I'm not sure whether money is sufficiently analogous for that to work in that case. And I don't think it's needed. So I'm willing to take it very seriously in the cases of novels and symphonies, because I feel the pressure. I don't see how we can make sense of them without it. But that is not... so there's some kind of... well, it's not conservatism. It's more like Occam's razor or something that is inspiring me here.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Brett, and thank you, Frank, for your answer. I don't know if there are other questions coming from the audience. I don't see.
So sorry, I have a question.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
I couldn't find the button. Sorry.
Okay.
maybe
Your video is off.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
So I was wondering, do you think it's a worthwhile distinction to make between money and coin? Because I do think that sometimes we make a lot of we confuse the two terms between what I consider a bill, which is an object, a real object, which acts as a coin, which I think is somewhat different from actual money. You know what I mean? Money, the difference being money as a method of accounting and coinage as a technology for replacing trust. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, well, let's see if this relates to your question. So there's a distinction to be made between the institution of money and let's stick with objects for the moment, and objects that are money. So the institution exists once there are certain rules in place, once there's certain practices, maybe the objects play a role there. But so the coins are operating at a different level of well, I shouldn't say the level of abstraction, but it's really like a type and a token. So the institution is general and the coin is specific. And this is very important because it's possible for an institution to outlast the objects that fall under it. Just to give an example, like when the Pope dies, the papacy still remains in existence. And there's certain rules about how to select a new Pope. And then there's new Pope in power, but the papacy never went out of existence, even though there was a time when there was no Pope. So that illustrates how the general level of the institution, how different it is from objects that fall under it and have a certain status.
Thank you very much, Benjamin and Frank. Say hello to the wonderful baby.
Yeah.
And we have another question from Jad Murad. I hope the pronunciation is right.
Hi. Yeah, that's right, Jad. So thank you again for the discussion. So I want to kind of continue off something that Brett was talking about. So I was noticing that there seems to be a common thread between, say, when we're talking about novels or symphony or money, and it's that they all constitute some form of information. And so my thinking is that the information is always instantiated in some physical form, which can, of course, change. Right now, the information in my phone gets mutated to the Wi-Fi signals, goes through the wires, and then comes out the other form. But it's always instantiated in some form. So I'm wondering whether that view of money as information is helpful in kind of categorizing it.
Well, there's certainly an important informational dimension to money, but I would immediately also like to point out that institutions, when I talk about the incentive dimension of institutions, I basically mean the expectations and preferences that support them. Preferences may be induced by situations and everything. So there's a bit more to it, but let's focus on expectations and preferences. Now, expectations have informational content. So in that sense, I would say yes, absolutely crucial. Our expectations about supply and demand and what you can actually do with money in the supermarket. And whether we can trust other people, whether it will retain its value. That's the most important thing when it comes to trusting money. All that has an informational component, but that is something we need to explicate. So in that sense, it's crucial.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Jad. We have another question coming from Nico. Thank you, Nick.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for the interview this evening. And I think my question here follows on from the previous question. If you talk about money as like information, and that also kind of intrinsically comes with a physical manifestation, are we not looking at a false dichotomy that's sending us around in circles when we say, is money physical or is it abstract? Because to me, it seems like it's in the nature of the symbol, i.e. a physical representation and a record that we keep. There has to have both the physical and the intangible in order to kind of maintain its nature. And I think, if we have to have units on the kind of physical, countable side, is there not always a bit of a paradox in that on the other side of the symbol, there's something intangible that I think Professor Smith said is more like a ratio?
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wonder if you agree that is it a false dichotomy there?
Well, I'm not sure because so if you have digital money or also just money in the bank on the balance sheet, that is very different from money that is a concrete object. And if it's just information, and this is a thought experiment that Hannes Smith also discusses in one of his papers. And suppose we do away with all the objects and we just do the accounting in our head. Then indeed we would do away with physical money, which is fine. I have no stake in it. However, there's still a couple of things. The first is it's going to be damn impractical. And so there's a reason why we have these physical representations. And it is still an open question whether the money is an abstract object or a property of an agent. Because so Hannes and I agree that the representation is just a representation of an amount of money. Maybe we differ in the details of how to spell that out, but and then the one says the representation represents an abstract object, and I say, well, it represents a property of me. And one example that I sometimes use to explain the difference, but this brings in physical commodity money again. So suppose you lose money. Now, and you and people around you recognize that you had it and now you lost it, and the money is out there, and maybe you find it again, maybe you don't. So it's also, information is an important component there as well, because it probably says like 10 euros on there or something. But the fact that we rely on these objects to coordinate in this in the market has a huge consequence. So it could, in principle, be that there's unowned money, which I don't think is possible when it comes to money in the bank or electronic money of individuals. Thanks. I hope this helps a little bit. I realize that there are more dimensions to this, but this is the next part of my answer.
Thank you.
Okay. So yes, I don't see other questions coming from the audience. So I think we can stop here. And thanks again to Frank and Johannes and to Lisa Warensky for constant work on the series, and of course to the participants for the stimulating questions. I hope to see you soon on the next Finance Online seminar.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.